Hi, this is Victor Vogel. In this part 2 of our series, we're going to combine two areas of kidnapping. The abduction duration, in other words, how long the kidnapping lasts, and the method of kidnapping. That's next. Alright, let's first start our second phase here in the two categories with the abduction locations. In other words, where do abductions tend to happen? And I don't think you'll find this surprising, but there is a rationale for why we want to think about this, because it tells us where we need to be alert. It tells us what we need to do in terms of our personal protection strategy to minimize an opportunity to be kidnapped in any of these particular locations. So let's just take a look at them. First of all, the first place that abductions happen at the highest level or the highest percentage rate is in vehicles or during transportation, and we find this to be true whether you're going from your house to a particular location. For example, if you're a bank manager and you have the access to a vault and some criminals know that, they may follow you or shadow you to determine the routes you take to and from work. If you're fairly consistent about that pattern, it makes it easy for them. And then they can decide anywhere along that route where there may not be video cameras or where there's going to be less risk for them in terms of the abduction situation. If you happen to be a movie star or a congressman or a senator or a high-ranking official in the world, wherever that might be, then they will probably try to find those locations you're most vulnerable with the least amount of resistance and risk on their part, and where they can do this quickly and easily. So transportation seems to be that place because most people don't have control over where they're traveling to. Okay, so you don't have control over whether they put video cameras on every street corner on your route. So that's why abduction during transportation is the highest rated abduction location. The next one might be in the areas of your facility of home or that environment around your home, or an environment where you might be located, like a hotel or something like that. These are a little bit harder for the terrorist or criminal to control, as opposed to a transportation abduction, because for example, a hotel might have security. You might prearrange security. You've got to go through locked doors. You can see why transportation will be a lot easier than hotels or a home facility or a place where you're lodging. Now, work is the place where you find the least amount of these scenarios happening here, and that's because in a work environment you normally have a lot of people around. Most of the time there's some sense of security nowadays, so you find it a little safer in a work environment. You're not always alone. In fact, most of the time you're not alone in those environments. So it's not easy for a terrorist or a criminal to get in there and take the action they need to take from an abduction standpoint. Now, from a lone shooter, which we're not talking about here, we're talking about kidnappings. A lone shooter might be able to walk in and start shooting the place up, but in terms of trying to go in and take somebody out of a desk while their workers are around, get them, capture them, take them, and then go out the front door, that's a lot harder than, say, breaking into your home over here, which is a little easier, and it's a lot easier not to have to worry about the protection of the home and everything, where you have the least amount of protection normally in that area. So these are abduction locations, so you need to most likely this tells you that you need to consider where you're traveling, the routes you're traveling, and how you travel, to what vehicles, what transportation services, etc. you use. For in Mexico, a lot of abductions happen based because taxi cab drivers and limo drivers and people that are native to Mexico that haven't been vetted by some sort of security company or security force work for the cartel, or they work for people who are in that kind of business, whether it's sex trafficking or whatever. So kidnapping, they are cabs and those kind of things can be a source there. That probably would be true in the Mideast. It's probably even true especially in the Philippines and Indonesia and those areas too. So transportation is that area, and when you think about traveling, you're making a trip somewhere in a business environment, then these are things you really need to be thinking more about, as opposed to, say, the hotel you're staying in or the office complex you may be traveling to or working in. So transportation is where I'd focus the largest part of my concern about setting some sort of strategy plan up, like never taking the same route, being inconsistent about times you're taking the routes, and making sure you take routes that have video camera services that are very visible, and things like that. These are all deterrents to kidnapping. Okay, so that's the abduction side of it. The next segment has to do with duration, and that's the amount of time someone is actually held in a kidnap situation. And that tells us a lot, because it tells us basically the type of person who is doing the kidnapping. Also tells us a lot the areas that have longer duration tend to be more severe kidnapping situations than areas that have shorter duration time periods. But let's take a look at this. We're going to break this down into segments of time, and we're also going to look at those that are local nationals and those that are foreign nationals, because there is a difference. There a lot of kidnappings that happen locally to local people who live in that vicinity, who live in that country, and then you have kidnappings that are aimed or targeted at foreign nationals, which is probably more what we're talking about when you travel into a foreign country as a U.S. citizen. However, you're going to find some interesting information and statistically a little bit about that. So let's take a look at once again our chart here. Now we go to duration cases. What you're seeing here is in the year 2015, which is really the latest full year of accurate information we have on kidnappings. We see that actually 75% of all kidnappings that happened in 2015 lasted less than 7 days. All right, so that tells you that normally these kidnappings are probably, the vast majority of them are happening for money and or some sort of political favor, like release somebody from jail or give me some money. And usually it sounds like the money is not in a situation where it's going to take a long time to get it up, or a long time to negotiate with the captors for this money. So as we look down here on the left-hand side of this chart, we see these are actually local nationals. About 75% of the kidnappings for local nationals happen on a local national basis. We see that less than somewhere around that week period, there's about 9%, and it drops proportionally as you start moving up to 2 weeks, 7%. So 75% of those kidnappings that happen to local nationals normally are resolved within a week or less. Maybe a 9%. It drops considerably to 9% for longer than, say, 2 weeks, and then 7% each down for a month, and then you can see we're really into a year, or more than a year of being held captive is about 1% for local nationals. So you can see people are not held for long periods of time, although this is what you see in movies, it's what you read in. These are those people that are held for long periods of time, like Iran or places like that, are probably get the greatest attention. But generally speaking, they are a very minor percentage of the people who are kidnapped last a year or longer. Quite a bit less on the local national. Now on the foreign national side, that would be us traveling to another country from America, you can see the percentages begin to increase a little bit in terms of the percentage of time, like 9% for a week, or 57% within the week, 9% more than a week, 8% 2 weeks, and then you get into a month, and you can see about 5% of the foreign national cases can go a year or longer than a year. And so where you have countries that where the percentage of foreign nationals might be at greater risk, and the profile of the kidnapper might be something greater than just a small amount of money or criminal. It might be more of a terrorist or geopolitical perspective. Then your time periods might go up longer. So countries where people are held for longer durations of time and aren't let go as quickly, and certainly aren't let go in good health. After the longer you're in there, the more likely you're going to suffer some sort of health issue because of your kidnapping. So what you see here on this is that foreign nationals, from the standpoint of being a foreign national, what's really important is that you understand the countries where the duration may be longer, and a lot of the kidnapping tends to happen during transportation or routes where you're going. Now, that happens in Mexico. It happens a lot in South America. The Middle East is known for that, and Indonesia is known for that. You have to really be careful who is guiding you, who is transporting you. All those arrangements need to be vetted very well before you go into a foreign country on vacation to do mountain climbing or hiking or something like that, to see a particular countryside scenario. And that's most particularly true right now in Mexico and Central America. So you really need to kind of be cautious about those areas. So there are a couple of areas, the location of the abduction, a couple of reasons why you want to be concerned about the location of the abduction, and also the duration of abduction, the amount of time the average time someone tends to be held in a country, whether foreign nationals are more likely to be kidnapped in certain countries than other countries. All this information can be found normally in your Department of State app that I told you about earlier. You can also query the Department of State to find out this information before you go on a trip. That allows you to generally be more precise about your personal protection strategy when you go there. Now, generally speaking, we would say this: you probably have to worry less as a foreign national traveling over there, and there are very few countries right now that are high on the kidnapping list, and most of them are in the Mideast and South America and Africa. So you can see how what we talked about in terms of the profile leading into the type of kidnapping, whether it's hostile or aggressive or express, etc., and where that tends to happen, because they give you a real good example of how you can integrate some of this. A criminal who kidnaps somebody, like in Mexico, might use the taxi service or transportation to pick you up, and so the profile of the person is a criminal profile, not a terrorist profile. Then they're there primarily they use transportation as the primary source of kidnapping you, and then the duration is very short, because really it's mostly express kidnapping, so they're going to take you to an ATM and take your cards out. So the type would be express, and they would get your money and they would let you go on the street right away and speed off. Okay, so that's an example of how you can begin to see this integrating the profile, the type, the abduction locations, and the duration of abductions tells you a lot. So Mexico, probably for the most part, a vast majority of them are foreign nationals that are abducted there, but a lot of locals too, because of government and corruption and the cartels infighting with themselves plus the government. But from our standpoint, being a foreign national, we probably are more concerned, unless you happen to be an executive or a high-profile person, you're probably concerned about a criminal abducting you, doing an express kidnapping. They'll probably do it in a transportation environment. It'll probably not be very long, maybe just a few hours or even less than that, and then you're let go. So you can see how you kind of put all this together I'm giving you, and you can begin to set a plan that says, hey, look, I need to not travel or not use transportation that I'm not absolutely sure is secure. I need to make sure I don't go traveling in environments where I'm not sure where the transportation is going to take me and whether it's a safe route to and from there in Mexico. And I need to not carry a lot of cards that have high limits of cash withdrawal with me, things like that. Okay, so that'll kind of catch you up on these two categories of abduction locations and duration of cases you need, or duration of time and of abduction that you need to be thinking about.